Attention has been rising for the past decades much faster than the cost of inflation. And the reason is because people's attention are limited. The customer value chain are all the activities that customers do in the process of identifying, choosing, buying, using, and then disposing of physical goods. The first startup that I ever visited was Facebook. They invited me to give a talk about the economics of attention. So the customer is the disruptor. Once you understand that, and understanding why the customer is being the disruptor, then you start thinking about what business model you should create to take advantage of that. The established companies need to know this.
Thales, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Yusuf. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much. Today we want to talk about your book, Unlocking the Customer Value Chain, How Decoupling Drives Consumer Consumption. This is the book. Really, really interesting insights. And you've worked on this book or done research for the book for 8 years, if that's correct?
That's it. About 8 years out of my 10 years at Harvard Business School.
That's a long time. So why did it take so long in the first place, Thales?
It took so long in the first place because I didn't know I was writing a book when I started. At Harvard, we teach MBA students with the case method. And we have to go to visit companies and startup entrepreneurs and executives in companies to write these cases. And so we do that through the process of our career. And I've written more than 35 Harvard Business School cases. And I just was doing research. I was writing cases. I was trying to create a class for my students to explain digital disruption and digital transformation. And so kind of when I realized that I had been inadvertently writing a book, that was the 8 years research. But in all honesty, once I decided, when I started writing the first words, it was about 14 months, just beginning to end of writing the book.
Mm-hmm. Why was university such a good place to do the research in the first place? Like, was it that you had access to startups, but also bigger corporations that collaborated with you? Or what was it that gave you the insights, the secret sauce to write that book?
So the first startup that I ever visited was Facebook. Before Facebook was big, it was in its old, smaller offices before it IPO'd. And they invited me to give a talk about the economics of attention, which is a subject of my research as a PhD student at the University of Michigan, and then as an assistant professor at Harvard Business School. So I went there to give a talk. I gave a talk about the economics of attention, about virality, viral advertising, which obviously was of interest to them. And this was back in 2010. But after doing that, I talked to executives. I said, there are other social media or websites or businesses out there. What are you guys doing so differently? How are you planning to disrupt the industry? And they kind of explained to me the process, what they were thinking. And I just wrote it down and then I left it to the side. But then afterwards, I was invited to give a talk at Netflix, and I gave a talk about economics of attention, then asked the executives about how they were planning to disrupt their industry. And I did that with Airbnb and many other startups, Wayfair, many other startups, not only in Silicon Valley, but in other parts of the world. And so the answer to your question is I got access to many people, entrepreneurs and executives that made it easier to collect the data for my book.
Mm-hmm. How has consumer attention, because you just mentioned it, Thales, how has the attention shifted since 2010 up until this point? Have people gotten worse in terms of, because of, we call it TikTokification, right? Are you back? You're back, right?
Yes.
Can you hear me again?
Yes,
okay.
I can.
Yeah, I'm just going to
repeat the question.
Yeah. Oh, well. You talked about attention. So how has the attention changed from 2010 up until this point, 2024? Because I think especially social media, now that let's mention TikTok, kind of this whole TikTokification thing has changed how people, basically their attention span. So how has it shifted from your perspective over the last 14 years?
So up until 2009 to 2010, when the internet was becoming a strong force in acquiring customers for businesses, before that, if you took an MBA class in the 2000s, they would teach you, well, there's different media for advertising. There's out of home advertising, there's TV, radio, print, and a few others. But within a business, you would treat it as differently. There were different costs, different ways to deal with the companies that were creating the advertising content. So it was very separate. What I started observing with the rise of digital media is that basically there was an explosion in different types of media, even within digital. You know, first you started a banner advertising, and then Google ads, and then organic search ads, and then you say you saw video ads on YouTube, and so on and so forth. But
Mhm.
that explosion of different types of media for content for advertising caused a shift both in the way that ads were sold and bought. And the summary of it is that, and this is what I try to really reinforce with this area that I called the economics of attention, is by having managers, advertising managers, and marketers forget about what type of media it was. It doesn't matter what type of media it is. It just matters is do I get the right attention from the right people? So I want to advertise to Yusuf. Do I get how much time of Yusuf's attention do I get? Do I get a minute? Do I get 2 minutes, 3 minutes? And whether I'm getting it through TV or YouTube or whatever, it doesn't matter. There's definitely quality issues in your attention, but really it's about getting enough amount of your attention and looking at the cost of your attention relative to all of the different platforms or media companies. So I try to make marketing executives more agnostic to the channel
Mhm.
and focusing more on the cost and then how to use the attention effectively. Now, what happened is with online media, initially Facebook and Google dominated 70-80% of the online advertising market. So they effectively became a duopoly. And in any economics course that you have, if you have a monopoly or duopoly, they basically increase the prices over time. And that's what happened with attention.
Mhm.
So I wrote a working paper at Harvard called The Rising Cost of Attention and What You Can Do About It, that shows that attention has been rising for the past decades much faster than the cost of inflation, the price of the inflation costs. And the reason is because people's attention are limited. We only increase the attention in the world as more people are born. We don't have more attention on our 24-hour a day. But
Mhm.
the demand for attention has skyrocketed. More businesses, more products wanting more attention. So the competition for attention, coupled with the fact that you have a duopoly in the online media space, in effect, caused the price of attention to skyrocket. And that is the big challenge that marketers face today. And there's no actual solution to it. It's just become a better buyer of attention, try to buy attention as cheaply as you can. But particularly convert attention to sales and branding more effectively. So that's basically the way to do it. And when you talk about the rise of TikTok and others, it's just a proliferation, more and more channels for attention. So advertisers are having a harder time because now you have to figure out a content that is very specific to each media. And now you have 5, 20, 30, 50 different types of content that match the format of the supply of attention.
Mhm. That's super interesting. I'm wondering, from a marketer's perspective, it's very difficult to understand like what does the consumer want. As marketers, we usually trivialize into form of personas, right? We think, we assume we know what our personas want. We specify them, we give them kind of names, ages, kind of a biography, so to speak. But humans are kind of in a dynamic system. They change very rapidly. So how can we as marketers become better in understanding the target audience that we want to target with ads, with content?
That's a great question. And kind of really in the past 20, 30 years ago, the segmentation of consumers in the market was done through demographics, right? what is your age, what is your gender, what is your income, where do you live, geography. And the reason they did that is because you could have that data, right?
Mhm.
You could get the data on all of these things because they were demographic, not psychographic attributes. And then there was a wave of marketing research to say it really doesn't matter your age, whether you are 20 or 80. If you behave conservatively and you like conservative products, that's what really matters to you, right? So then we moved into this of psychographics type of segmentation, and with that came an industry, many companies saying, we're going to identify for whatever industry you are in, kind of the personas that exist there, and describe the personas, and that will help you do targeting better. Guess what? That was, in theory, that was a good idea. In practice, it became a nightmare because any person in a marketing agency could create a persona.
Mhm.
Well, Yosef is like, he's smart, but cool, but hip, likes to save money, but also likes to dine out and doesn't eat meat, but does this, does that. And then you create all these personas. And then you started having many more personas. And in effect, that didn't help really marketers to target better, right? So I'm not really a big fan of this idea of personas. In some cases, it can be useful, but in many cases, it's very easy to come up with all of these 5, 10, 15, 20 different personas. And then it becomes the job of the marketer of targeting much harder. What the beauty of online advertising is you can actually have a variety of metrics that you think are correlated with the action that you want. And then you advertise against those metrics, and then you get the metrics back, right? You get this metrics back of what is the conversion rate of these people. And then you target based on where they're going. So regardless of the persona, if you are going to a news outlet, that might say something about you, so I'll target you there. If you're going to other websites and searching for other things, that will reveal to me as a marketer better information than if I just come up with a story about who you are. And so the new wave is about targeting based on where do you visit, where do you spend your time and your attention online. That will be a better predictor of marketing effectiveness of advertisements than actually coming up with personas.
Mhm. Yeah, that makes sense. I want to kind of talk about the sentence unlocking the customer value chain. What is the customer value chain? And then also in regards to the persona that we just talked about, how can we unlock the customer value chain? And why is it so easy for startups, maybe compared to like the giants, the industry giants, to potentially beat the bigger players?
Mm-hmm. So to start off, the funny story is when you write a book or a business book, basically you sign a contract with a publisher, and the publisher in the 15 or 20 pages, right down the bottom, they say, we control the title of your book. So they decided. So I wanted to call my book Decoupling because my theory is called Decoupling, but they said, no,
Mhm.
we're going to call it Unlocking the Customer Value Chain. And I got used to the idea now. I think it's a good title because the principle of decoupling behind it is really the customer value chain. The customer value chain are all the activities that customers do in the process of identifying, choosing, buying, using, and then disposing of physical goods, or in the case of services, not having to dispose, but all these activities that customers do in the process of consuming products and services. So, for example, if you want to buy a brand new car, first you become aware that you need a car. I need a four-wheel drive. Then I'm going to start I'm not really in the process of buying yet. So I just start watching YouTube videos, watch TV ads, pay more attention. Then I say, okay, I want to buy a new car. So then I start going online and I look at TV ads and I compare options. Then I go to the dealer. I look, I evaluate, I do a test drive. I say, well, I have a used car, so let me put my used car in the process of paying for the new car. I negotiate. I get the documents, sign the contract, receive the car, use the car, maintain the car, dispose of the car, sell it later. All of these activities are part of my customer value chain. And they are different from the customer journey because marketers use the customer journey as only the activities that customers do in order to buy a product. I go
Mhm.
beyond. You have to understand before, even before the act of trying to shop, as well as after the act of using and even disposing of cars. So this is the strategic tool that companies need to understand, because in the process of buying products and services, you need to understand what the customer is really after. And the customer is really after kind of solving their problems, their day-to-day life problems, with purchasing products and services. And so when you look at a more expanded view of the customer value chain, you see that customers have to do a bunch of activities. They want to do a few, but they have to do others. So I have to go to the dealer. I have to negotiate. Sometimes I don't like comparing options of models and specs and things like that, but I have to submit documentation.
Mm-hmm.
These are what I call value eroding activities, or activities that we as customers are forced to do in the process of buying products, but we don't like doing it and we lose value from it. Staying in line in a supermarket, or checking in or checking out in a hotel. These are value eroding activities. We do it because we derive value from, for example, using a product, like using a car. But I have to maintain the car, and it's a value eroding activity. And I have to pay for the car, which is the third activity in the customer value chain, which is the process of paying for value, or the value capturing activities. So in any industry where there's a customer, it could be a consumer, individual, a business, the government, you can map out the activities of the customer's value chain, and you can separate those activities into, is it a value creating activity, a value capturing activity in which customers pay, or a value eroding activity, which is customers don't get a benefit from it, but they're forced to do it. So the book, Unlocking the Customer Value Chain, shows this principle of the customer value chain and how the new wave of digital disruption is causing startups to look at the customer value chain and breaking it apart and stealing an activity to do it better for customers than the established companies.
Mm-hmm. That makes a lot of sense. So I think that even looking at the funnel from a marketing perspective is a way too trivialized, because we think about in terms of leads, MQLs, SQLs, etc. But it makes more sense to, as you said, look even before the funnel, before they enter the funnel, and after they've basically purchased the product. This is what
That's right. So the funnel is a valuable tool, and I advocate to use it. I'm not against the funnel, but the funnel, as you say, trivializes, puts all the customers as little balls in a funnel. So all these little balls in the beginning, and then some of them trickle down, 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 down until you get a sale. So salespeople use that because they're playing a game of numbers. But from a senior executive, a CMO, or even a CEO, they need to know what they build or manufacture or sell, or the service that they create. They need to know what their customers have to do in order to capture value from the products and services that they're commercializing. And the customer value chain is a more strategic tool for senior executives.
Yeah. Do you have any practical advice for marketers how they can actually think about this? Especially, let's say I'm a CMO, I work for a company, and I have to think about the value creating activities instead of the value eroding activities. How can I think about this in terms of marketing activities and campaigns and KPIs?
Yeah, so I often observe that marketers and companies, they very quickly try to move into what should we do to increase our sales, or what should we do to reduce the cost of advertising, right? Or what should we do to become more effective? And oftentimes they have not done enough of the prerequisites, because as a business, you're trying to change the behavior of certain customers, and you need to understand what the behavior of the customer is in the first place. So the customer value chain allows you to understand what are the natural behaviors of customers, right? And when you map out the customer value chain, even before you discover what you're going to do to try to influence that, you need to understand one thing that I always do when I map out the customer value chain. For example, in buying life insurance or home insurance, there are so many activities that the customer is forced to do that they don't like, that erodes value for them. Right? You have to compare options. Imagine each company has a different policy with different rules and different documents. As a consumer, if you want to compare the prices, just identify the price of healthcare insurance across different companies is already complicated, because each company has different insurance types with different prices and different fees and different claims and different rules. And then you never know what is being covered by each insurance. And if you want to compare one company versus the other, it's a nightmare. You would need to read all the documents. Nobody does that, right? But ultimately, if you want to find the best plan, you would need to go to all the insurance companies, look at all the plans that they have, and then compare across each other, right? Until you decide one, and then you talk to them. You have to submit documentation or request. They evaluate. Sometimes it's a health insurance. You have to have a physical exam. There's so many activities in the process of buying insurance that people hate to do, but because it's value eroding activities. It doesn't benefit them until they get the insurance. They get the peace of mind, they're covered. And then there's a lot of things they have to do until they have to use the insurance, right? So when you look at all of these activities, you would imagine, wow, if there is a company out there that could get all of these insurance companies, all of the products of the insurance companies, and lay it out in one page for me and tell me the pros and cons, who are the best, how do they compare, which one offers more or less, which all of the specific features of the contract, and tell me this is the top, this is the best, this is the worst. If you're older, this, if you're healthy, this, all of these things, that would be extremely valuable to me because it would eliminate me having to do all this work. Guess what? These startups started to appear a few years ago, right? So many startups started to do this work for the customer and they decoupled these activities, meaning I, as a customer, used to do all these activities. Now I go, before I buy my health insurance or life insurance, I go to a company. And different countries have versions of these. They're all startups, by the way, in the US, in the Netherlands, and South America. They created a way to summarize insurance for you and offer you. And so they did this work and they took that activity that I used to do with all of these other websites of insurance companies. Now they do it for me. And they do it and they don't charge any money. I say, okay, but how do they make money? Well, they make money through affiliate fees or trying to sell me other things, advertising or saying, click here. This is the best insurance. Click to go there and apply. And when I click, basically they get a commission if I buy that product in the form of affiliate fees or selling leads. Right. So this is decoupling in its essence. And if you, as an insurance executive, if you don't understand these elements, you start seeing a few things. You had an insurance company and you start seeing, we used to have a sales force that would get 100% of our clients. Now, 25% of our clients come from affiliate fees from this other website that is sending us, new customers. We have to pay them a commission. And now they're starting to increase the commission rate that they're charging. And now I have a problem because I have a bunch of Salesforce people and I need to fire some of them, right? And now, well, I don't have control because sometimes I get a lot of sales, sometimes I don't get sales leads at all. Now I have to buy leads and I'm competing with the leads are increasing the price. By the way, acquiring a customer insurance is becoming more and more expensive. It used to be less than $100. Now it's $200, $300, $400. Just clicking, life insurance on Google. If you create a Google ad, just to click there in the US, it's just the cost per click has gone to $60, $70, $80, $90 just on a click. Doesn't mean you're getting a customer. So these insurance companies have started spending so much money with all of these forms of customer acquisition, and they don't understand, like, what is the root cause of this? Well, they created the problem. They created a problem by creating so many insurance products and many insurance companies competing, and consumers like me, I can't figure out which one to buy, so I go to another company that will help me, and that is decoupling. Decoupling is the breaking of the links in the customer value chain, often by a digital startup that was often done by the established company, but now the startup does that much better, faster, and cheaper for the customer. And that's why I use these new websites that compare across financial. In the financial services, you have websites that compare insurance, compare mortgages, compare if you're taking a loan, compare different loans from different banks, all of these different types of financial products. Now there is a startup that does that comparison for you. Customers are happier, and the whole ecosystem of customer acquisition has changed as a consequence of that.
Let's say I'm running such a startup, Thales. and at some point I have to scale up my company, which is kind of a consequence. We get more customers, we make more money, we want to scale the company. What can I do as a big enterprise or corporation to make sure I'm not losing to another digital startup that might again decouple the customer value chain and finds a gap where they can tap into, and then I'm losing against a smaller startup?
Mhm. So the basic question is, okay, decoupling has happened in insurance, decoupling has happened in financial services, probably decoupling has happened in a variety of other industries, and that is what I show in the book. Decoupling is this third wave of digital disruption that's been happening in many countries in many industries. Startups stealing an activity in the customer value chain that used to be provided by established companies, what we call incumbents. So,
Yeah.
what is an incumbent to do, right? In the book, I show that while you might think that there's a variety of things, we can buy the company, we can fight back, we can do a price war, we can do this, or that. At the end of the day, there's two major avenues that are kind of theoretical. And these two major avenues take the company in very different places, and they can be executed in 1,000 different ways. But there's two major avenues. And before I tell you, let's just think about the logic, right? Imagine kind of I have a pen, and comes a startup and breaks the pen and takes out a piece. What can I do? First, I'm really upset. The first thing I could do is just try to put the pen back again. That's one option. I'm trying to get the items back and put it together as it was before. In the book, I call recoupling. So if somebody breaks apart your customer value chain and steals an activity, you can try to kind of prohibit that by trying to recouple the broken activities back together, go back to the past. And one example of that is, for example, the established company creating their own website that compares across products of insurance and financial services to do that activity instead of losing that activity to another startup. And sometimes they might succeed in doing that, but oftentimes they don't do it, and we can talk about the reasons later. But recoupling is definitely one thing that can be done. The other one is, well, the pen has been broken. It's never going to go back to what it used to be. I'm just going to live with the fact that my pen is broken. I'm going to try to use it. I'm going to do something else with it. And that in the book I call rebalancing, which is you decouple yourself, right? And then you try to, knowing that your business model is now broken because there was a business model behind that, you will try to kind of rebalance the profitability equation, or the way you capture value and the way you create value, to coexist with the fact that now you have disruptors that are operating and growing. Right. So in a case of most insurance companies, what they did is rebalancing, which is they didn't create their own competitor to the startup. They just learned to live with the fact that now they have to pay for leads and affiliate fees and all these things. They just coexisted with this new business model, and they realized that they have to reduce their sales force. They have to, in some cases, they're just completely eliminating physical agents, because they know that once you acquire customers online, and then the customers want to do self-service, they don't want to talk to an insurance agent anymore, particularly young customers. So then kind of you need to change your organization. You're spending much more on online advertising, much more on sales leads, and much less on salespeople and this physical infrastructure. So the answer to when a big company is decoupled, what they can do, they can try to recouple, regain back the lost activities, or they can preemptively decouple, live with the fact that it's broken, and rebalancing their business model by changing how they create value and capture value.
I see, that makes sense. Very well explained. Is there kind of a physical or theoretical limit on how much you can decouple a customer value chain? Because I can imagine you can only decouple so much until it's broken into its elementary pieces, and then you can't decouple it anymore. Or is it then that the combination of different values or decoupling elements is then picked up by different companies in different ways? And How does
Yeah,
that work?
great question. And I actually had this question, Yusuf. I had this question. I think it was around even after I wrote the book, right? And I worked a lot on trying to answer this question for myself because it was a puzzle in my mind. In your argument, yes, if you have, when we talked about selling cars, basically I just described at least 10, 15 activities in the process of buying a car.
Mhm.
And you can say, well, decoupling. Some startup comes up and says, well, instead of your selling your car to the dealer as part of the trade in, we can sell your car. So decouple that activity. So then you go to the dealer with cash to buy a new car. Negotiation. We can negotiate on your behalf. I don't know if there's a startup that does that, but we
Mhm.
can say hire a negotiator and they'll go and buy the car for you because they're more, they're better at negotiating than the average person. Or a test drive. There could be a startup that says, if you have to go to the dealer, see the cars and test drive, let's create a business. We're going to test drive cars for you. You choose a car online, somebody brings it, you can test drive it and take it back. Just a business out of test driving. By the way, I don't know if these are financially feasible. It's just coming to my mind, right?
Mhm.
And so on. You can think about different businesses decoupling the activities that a car dealer would normally do. And there's benefit for customers, right? I get convenience. I save time. I save money by selling the car or negotiating better. Like I said, the reason people decouple is because they save money, they save time, or they save effort. Now, let's go to a supermarket. A supermarket sells 30,000 items. And imagine you go to a supermarket every week and you buy your grocery list of 100 things that goes in your shopping cart. And then over time, there comes up a shop that says, well, we have a wine store. And in the wine store, we sell much better wines at cheaper prices. And you love wine, so you go to the supermarket, you buy everything, but then you go to buy wine at the wine store because it's cheaper and there's, more variety, better service, things like that. And then next week, say, we have a bakery. There's a bakery and it's better than the bread that you buy in the supermarket. And then there's a flower shop. And then there is a kind of pet food shop. And then there is like in the United States, I don't know if you have it in the Netherlands, in the United States, you have cookie shops. They just sell cookies. And one
Mhm.
just sells cupcakes. And then one just sells donuts. And then I start in a sense, decouple and use different businesses for my shopping needs. But then at the extreme, I used to buy 100 products in the supermarket. Now I'm buying 20 products in the supermarket. I have to go to all these other stores. Even if they sell online, I have to go to 50 other websites and get my cookie, get my pastry, get my this, get my that, right? Eventually, the process of decoupling made me go from one vendor, the supermarket, to 30, 40 different vendors. And now this complexity has taken over my life. And now it's worse than that original benefit that I get of specialization. So, to answer your question, there is a limit. And I think of it as a pendulum.
Mhm.
One side of the pendulum is specialization. Different companies offer very specialized products or activities in the customer value chain. And the benefit of specialization is you can get something better, often cheaper. But the downside is that you start having to deal with multiple vendors. And the opposite side of the spectrum is integration, what I call integration. You put everything together. I use one bank for all of my financial needs. Use one insurance for all of my insurance needs. I use one supermarket for all of those needs. But then I'm not getting the best of everything available,
Mhm.
right? So the people are gravitating between specialization and integration, and just like a pendulum, as you go more and more and more and more up towards one extreme, the power of the ball of the pendulum forces you back again. So there's kind of a sort of like a physical limit, because if you do it too much, it becomes a nightmare. Integration becomes too much of a nightmare, too many problems for the customer, or specialization, too many problems for the customer.
Yeah, I see. I'm imagining, is there also a limit in terms of numbers? So when we think about humans as a population, let's say, is there kind of a number where I would say if X amount of people have this problem, then I should start thinking about decoupling the customer value chain, because then it might make sense to work on that problem and maybe reinvent the wheel, so to speak, without using any new technology, because the technology is already existing. It might be a disruptive technology. So is there kind of a limit in terms of like how many people should have a problem in order to for me to make enough
Absolutely,
money?
right. You also that's another factor. As a startup entrepreneur, you should think about the size of your market, right?
Yeah.
So, how many people are actually having the problem of negotiating with card vendors? How many people are actually having the problem of I go to the supermarket, but I don't like the bread that is there. I wish I had something better. How many
Mm-hmm.
people have the problem of comparing different types of insurance takes too much time, and I wish I had another solution. So,
Yeah.
obviously, what we call the total addressable market is something to consider.
Got it. I'm thinking about the delta T, so the time when a disruptive technology appears. Let's think about artificial intelligence. It's there for a couple of years now, right? But I feel there is so many solutions out there, software tools, solutions, startups that leverage, for example, ChatGPT or maybe the API of ChatGPT, but it doesn't really solve a problem. Will there be a time where we actually have identified real human problems that we can solve with artificial intelligence? Where I'm not saying we don't do that now, but it feels like there's a lot of fluff out there.
Hmm. So backing up a little bit, um, in the process of writing the book, Unlocking the Customer Value Chain, what I realized, which is different from what I would read in business books and magazines and newspapers that talked a lot about disruptive technologies. And my former colleague, Clay Christensen, who passed away, was really the proponent of technology being the disruptor.
Mm-hmm.
I realized by visiting many startups that they had the same technologies that other companies had. If you think about Uber, Uber had the same technologies that you and I had. We could have created Uber at the time before drivers had a smartphone that had GPS capabilities. They would just buy a little GPS. It cost $20, $30, put it in the car so you could track the car, right? So Uber didn't have a technology that others didn't have. Airbnb didn't have a proprietary technology. And what I come to realize, many of these startups that are successful, they don't have a proprietary technology. There's some exceptions, right? If you think of Apple, has technologies that others don't have, right? If you think of Nvidia today, has technologies that others don't have. But the technology, the disruptive technology being unique is actually much less common than you would imagine. Most startups that disrupt market, they look at the customer value chain, they find weaknesses where customers are unsatisfied, and they target that activity and they steal that activity through the process of decoupling. So ultimately, they realize faster than other established companies that customers are unhappy, their behavior is changing, and they have different needs. And so they build a startup that service these customers. And so in most cases, technology is not the disruptor. The customer is the disruptor. The customer that decides to use Uber, ride sharing in general, or the customer that decides to not use hotels all the time and try to stay in people's homes, that is causing disruption in the marketplaces. So the customer is the disruptor. Once you understand that, and understanding why the customer is being the disruptor, that they want to save money, want to save time, want to save effort, want to have a different experience, then you start thinking about what business model you should create to take advantage of that, offering the service and then monetizing in different ways the service. And yes, in some cases, technologies might be helpful. Now, what we're seeing with AI is AI really is a general purpose technology. It's like a
Mm-hmm.
computer or it's like the internet. It can be applied for many, many different purposes. And some of these purposes, they're actual real challenges that a significant amount of consumers are having, and they'll have repeatedly, right? I need to constantly generate image for my PowerPoint slides. So there's a tool for that, and I'm using that tool. I need to ask questions all the time, and I don't want to go to a website and click links. So I can use ChatGPT for that. So definitely there's recurring consumer problems that are being solved by certain AI tools, but others what we're seeing is you use it once, you find it interesting, but you don't really have a problem that is solving, or particularly not a problem that you see that problem reoccur, repeat again and again. So, in my experience, what I've been working with founders of startups is first mapping out the customer value chain
Yeah.
and figuring out where there are points in which customers are very unhappy. Those I call the weak links because those are the easiest ones to decouple, easiest ones to steal. And then thinking about kind of what technologies, what AI tools can actually help in stealing that activity by offering that activity again much better, faster, or cheaper using AI. If you can answer that question, AI can make it cheaper, faster, easier to do that activity for
Yeah.
customers. Then AI will be worthwhile as a technological solution for that problem. But oftentimes, it's just not the case.
Absolutely. I'm wondering, you talked a lot about customers right now. I think it's also asking the right questions to the customer, because sometimes the customer is not even aware of a problem that might be existing in the organization. So how do you ask the right question to the customer?
So some people think that when a marketer like me talks about understanding customers, the first thing that they say, "Oh, let's ask the customer a question." Understanding customers is not really only asking customers question. And by the way, the customer's job is not to tell companies what their problems are and how they solve it. So oftentimes, the customers are not going to engage. Like just because you can ask a question and do a survey doesn't mean that I'm going to really think about my problem, really think about issue, and answer that survey very, very precisely so you can get a good measure. Marketers forget that you can always ask a question. Yusuf, what's the biggest problem in your life regarding kind of XYZ? And then I'll give you some money and I'll force you to answer. You come up with something, but that might not be meaningless,
Yeah.
right? So, for example, going back to the AI tool. So, I also have a consulting company called Decoupling.co, and we map out customer value chains for our clients in a variety of industries and countries. And we need to identify the weak links. So in selling automobiles, the weak link for the dealer is actually that activity that I told you. Trying to trade in your used car, because once you do that, the salesperson will say, "Well, your car is worth 30,000 euro, and you thought it was 50,000, so you're really upset there." That happens a lot. So that's one of the weakest links in the process of buying new cars, getting a good value for your used car. And so we had to identify that. And the way we identified it is by kind of measuring the NPS score or Net Promoter Score, not for each company, but for each activity in the customer value chain. So we
Got it.
measured a satisfaction or what we call the decomposed NPS score to be able to evaluate satisfaction across the customer value chain. And then for each company in the market, Toyota, Honda, Nissan, Ford, GM, Chrysler, whatever, you don't have just an NPS number, but you have a curve that goes up and down depending on the level of satisfaction of customers with each of those activities done by that brand. We identified most brands have a problem in the getting the value of the trade-in. And if we had asked customers about that, they might not have told us exactly, this is my biggest problem, you need to solve it. So what do? We created a tool, an AI tool that goes online, finds reviews for people that bought cars in the last few months, reads the review. It's a Gen AI tool that reads the review, identifies the brand. Oh, this is a BMW. Reads and tries to figure out what activities in the customer value chain that person was talking about. So, for example, the test drive was great, but negotiating the value of my used car was really bad. I was very upset. And then the delivery of car, there was a few problems. Oh, these three activities. And then it transforms the text into a numerical quantitative number that we can associate with all of the other data that we're collecting, so that again we can reconstruct the NPS decomposed or satisfaction decomposed by each activity in the customer value chain. And we do that hundreds of thousands of times So now we have all of the brands in the market, the curve of NPS based on online reviews. This
That
made
is
our
super
job
interesting.
much easier to understand. So again, we didn't ask customers. The reviews are online. Customers were naturally talking in the language that they do. If I were to create a survey saying, did you buy a car recently? Evaluate all of these activities on a scale of, would you recommend or not the brand because of this activity? I would have 15 questions at least to customers. They would hate doing the survey.
Yeah.
After some time, the first few ones they think about it, but after sometimes they forget or they write each number 10, 10, 10, 10, 10, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, and and then it becomes garbage data for me to use as part of my strategic marketing initiatives, right?
This is
So that's an
super
example
interesting.
to understand customers. You don't really need to ask questions. And by the way, you should ask the least amount of questions to customers only when you cannot get that data in any other fashion.
This is super interesting. Thanks for sharing that, Thales.
My
I'm
pleasure.
wondering, you for decoupling.co, how do you decouple the customer value chain? Because I can imagine there's maybe competitors in your market. So
Yeah.
how did you do that? What is your kind of competitive advantage for your agency right now?
So
Have you even thought about it that way, decoupling the customer value chain? Or
no, no, I haven't
okay,
thought about it decoupling this, but you should definitely use the tools that you approach. We use quite a few tools. So one of them is by learning. When I told you back in the beginning that I said I wrote 35 Harvard Business School cases, one thing that shocked me is I wrote cases on startups that were trying to disrupt markets, the attackers, and then I wrote cases on the defenders, established companies, big companies like Nissan, like Coca Cola, like Best Buy, that were trying to defend from the disruptors because I wanted to get both sides of the story. And one thing that I learned was disruption almost always happens by outsiders of the industry, right? And you think about the auto industry or think about kind of retailing. Best Buy is an electronics retailer in the US. People at Best Buy are always looking at what's going to attack them, what's changing, what Amazon is doing. They're constantly looking at that. So they're looking at this field, and sometimes a company comes and disrupts them from a completely different angle or industry. So most of the disruptors are outside of the industry. Airbnb and Uber founders, they never worked in the transportation or hospitality industry, yet they disrupted those markets, right? So our what we do for our clients is we say, I don't know your industry. I'm not a specialist in the industry. And by the way, consulting is very specialized. If you're in retailing, you hire a retailing expert. If you're in the media industry, you hire a media expert. So we go to our clients and say, we don't understand your industry. We don't know. We have zero experience sometimes. Yet we understand customers and we understand that the process of disruption is generally customer centric disruption. And we looked at various industries and various business models. So, what we can help you with is by bringing in all of the knowledge from all the other industries, what's working, what's not working, what are the challenges, the problems from the other industries, that might help you understand what to do in your own industry. So a media company that hired us, we brought in a lot of insights from retailing, right? An auto company, we brought in a lot of insights from the insurance industry. And that's part of what we do. We bring in the knowledge from all the other industries that are in the process of disruption, being disrupted, responding, attacking, defending, and all of these things. So in a sense, kind of that kind of is our ability to kind of bring in the data like I showed you using AI, online
yeah,
reviews and AI to quickly diagnose the problem. Because one thing that I've learned is the vast majority of established companies, when they come to us with a problem, that is just like when you go to a doctor and you have a pain somewhere. The pain is often not the root cause of the problem. The pain is just kind of what you're observing, what you're experiencing. But we go deeper to try to understand the root cause, not just the symptom. And then we solve the root cause. We don't solve the symptom for our clients.
Got it. How can companies anticipate kind of consumer-driven disruption to be future-proof? And this is kind of my last question to you. Do you have some practical tips on what we could do as companies, whether that's an agency, a big corporation, a startup, to make sure we are future-proof
Yeah.
for these kind of disruptions?
So, the way I've been thinking is I've tried to help our clients understand that the real battle for disruption and digital transformation as the way to respond to digital disruption is not at the technology level, because technologies come and go. Some, Google Glass, a metaverse, kind of a lot of technologies came in and kind of they disappeared. So the technologies that stay are the ones that customers adopt, right? So just like everything, technologies, disruptive technologies are adopted by certain customers. So the real fight happens in the customer value chain. That's where the battle is. So you need to understand the customer value chain, map it out in as much detail as possible, identify which are value creating, value capturing, value eroding activities, and then keep track of how satisfied your customers are with each of these activities that you offer to your customer. Because if once you keep track of it, and we use the decomposed NPS scores, you will know where you're doing very well, where you're doing very poorly, where the whole industry is doing poorly, where the industry is doing well, but you're doing poorly, in order to fix. Because if you allow these weak links that we call activities that you offer of low satisfaction to exist, that is how startups are going to enter the market. They enter through the weakest link by the process of decoupling. And once they establish themselves in your customer value chain, guess what they do? They start expanding. They capture other activities more and more and more. And one day, the disruptor that stole one activity becomes the incumbent. They completely captured all of the activities in the customer value chain. So the answer to your question is the established companies need to know this, need to figure out the battle plan in the customer value chain, where they're strong, where they're weak, fix where they're weak, and to avoid leaving opportunities in the table for startups in the industry or outside the industries to enter, attack, and steal those activities.
Excellent. Thales, thank you so much. I certainly learned a lot. If people want to check out the book, can highly recommend it. I'll also put a link in the description so people can check it out. With that being said, thank you so much for being a guest on my show.
My pleasure. It's a pleasure to be here, talk about all these topics that are near and dear to me. And there's a huge amount of opportunities, both in disruption in industries as well as for established companies to do a digital transformation. So always pleasure talking about these things with you.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Bye.